Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob and Adam with you here today. It is Sunday, the 15th of June. We're still a long way from training camp, Adam. We're still a long way from the 2025 NFL season starting, but the Seahawks have had minicamp. I always kind of feel a little bit like minicamp, in a way, shouldn't have the amount of eyes on it that it does, because people are just desperate for content, for anything at this point. And the media are allowed to attend. And as someone who works in the media, any kind of ability to get some interviews and get some content is always very, very welcome. So this is not a criticism of the media, but I do kind of feel like this is training camp before training camp. This is the initial installation. And all I kind of took away from minicamp was, isn't it great that everybody seems to actually be there, that no one's holding out, that everybody is actually participating? But instead, what you get is, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. Sam Darnold doesn't look amazing. Is there a quarterback debate to have there? Let's ask Mike McDonald about it. Mike McDonald flips his lid. Then all of the other content makers like Rich Eisen and Mike Florio don't have anything to talk about. So then that's manna from heaven for them, because they can write something about it, or they can do 6 minutes on it on their show every day. And you are desperate and searching for things to discuss. I don't know. The NFL does a lot of things right. I think there are two things it doesn't do right, though, Adam, and I wonder what you think about this. One, it's not having anything that can fill this void between the draft and training camp, and allowing minicamp to actually be a media event. I just don't think either of those things are particularly well planned.
It's so funny, having just spoken off camera about how sort of growing another show and in soccer and not wanting to talk about transfer rumors, even though that's what drives content, because it's just terminally boring. It's amazing that like the big stories that have come out of minicamp really are the players that haven't got contracts, and it's mind-numbing, whether it's Shamar Stewart or Trey Hendrickson. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that they both come from the same team, or TJ Watt. And you're right, like, it's great that hasn't come from Seattle, but it's almost like there's like bandwidth that has to be filled by something. And so I said to Stuart, my mate over here, like, it feels like I'm hearing about Sam Darnold throwing more interceptions than we would normally have heard about a quarterback. And I don't think that's because he's throwing more. I just think there's nothing else to talk about in Seahawk land, and that the column inches have to be filled with something. It probably helps a narrative that I think people would quite fancy a quarterback controversy this year. They're not going to have one, but I think people will be quite up for talking about it a bit more, if possible. It sort of seems a little bit milquetoast just going in to the season knowing who the quarterback's going to be, even though there's two other guys that maybe could steal the job. I don't think people are trying to drum it up as such, but I don't think people would bat it away if it did come up in conversation more concretely during actual training camp. But yeah, it's funny. Like, yeah, it's one of those things that the best news is no news, but then people have to talk about something.
So we've had this question, and if you have a question, send in a super chat. I'm going to make an exception. This is not a super chat, because I do think it's an interesting thing to start on before we get on to some more important topics. But Big Mike says, what would you suggest for the NFL this time of year? And there isn't a lot going on at the minute. I don't know about you, Adam. I will not watch probably a minute of the Club World Cup soccer tournament that's going on in America. I did watch England play an under-21s game. They drew 0-0 with the mighty Slovenia earlier today. So I watched that to fill some of my afternoon. But I have been keeping an eye on the Abbotsford Canucks, who are the sort of how we would describe it over here, like the youth team, or the sort of under-21 team for the Vancouver Canucks in the NHL. So they have some senior players who get to play in that, but generally it's the players who need development, who are not ready for the NHL, and they work through. And they're playing in something called the Calder Cup against a team from Charlotte, and they're in the finals. So they're in the finals. They're leading 1-0. They won the first game controversially. They're playing the second game now. It's 2-2 as we speak. Adam, I'd love to see something where the teams who, they're drafting all these young players. There's all these undrafted players who are coming into the league every year. And there are so few opportunities for these players at the back end to develop, to have some time, to make a career of this. It feels like, especially someone who does a lot of draft stuff, that any player drafted on day 3 that sort of moment of getting to the league is often short-lived because they'll soon find themselves out of the league again. And shouldn't the NFL, something as big and as powerful as the NFL, have something where all 32 teams, like they do in the NHL, have a secondary team? You could put this in another part of Washington State for the Seahawks point of view, and that it would be almost like a B team, a reserve team, a youth team for players that they've signed or drafted who they can associate to this. Maybe they could do it for 2 years before they have to make a decision whether to move them onto the main roster or not. Maybe it's 3 years. Maybe it's just their rookie contracts, to provide some development, to provide some competition, because it wouldn't be the best quality of football and it wouldn't have a massive audience. But if we were watching right now a summer league where young Seahawks players were playing against, let's say, young 49ers players, I think that'd be something that would be interesting and would fill the void a little bit.
It's really funny. I was listening to a podcast talking about why isn't there an alternate league? Like, why isn't there a Europe league? Why isn't there like the XFL? Why did it fail? And the conclusion they came to was, unless you make some tweaks to the rules whereby it attracts attention that way, people don't want to watch just a worse version of the product that they like already. But I think what you've come up with there is actually great, because it gives you a means to an end for why the games are happening. It's not just a competition where someone wins the, Inferno Bowl at the end of it, and no one really there's no structure and there's no reason for it. But if there was a league where it was purely developmental and the results didn't matter as much as watching these guys play, I think people would get right behind that. And actually, as we're talking sort of crackpot ideas, one that I've always had that maybe would benefit the day two guys more is, so in soccer, for people that don't know, you can loan players. So the Seahawks would retain Elijah Arroyo's contract, for example, but we could loan him to the Tennessee Titans for a season where he could play a full season and then come back to Seattle with the development. He's developed for a year, played more games, and comes back a better player, which benefits the Titans, hopefully in the short term, Seahawks in the long term. And I would love to see that, particularly for someone like Milroe, for example. Is there a team that he's not going to play for Seattle this year, but would he play for another team for a year next year and everyone wins? So that's the kind of thing that I'd love, And this part of the year when people are going to say, no, I totally understand it. It's completely different. It's a wild, it's June 15th. We've got to fill the time somehow. I would love to see that as my sort of mad way to fill the time.
I was struggling for the term that they would use in North America to describe this, and thankfully, Jen has posted it. Farm team. That's what they have in the NHL. They have, the Abbotsford Canucks are a farm team, and I also quite like, because I used to live in I lived in Abbotsford for about 3 or 4 weeks when I initially moved to Canada before moving to downtown Vancouver. So I kind of have a little soft spot for them. But when I look at the Canucks team, and people won't know who the Canucks are, but people like Linus Karlsson and the netminder, for example, and one or two others, Victor Mancini, Artur Silovs is the netminder. They've played for the Canucks. They're now playing for Abbotsford. In this system that I'm coming up with here, I know we've completely gone off on a tangent. If you had a farm team in, I don't know, pick somewhere, Renton, I don't know, pick a place, okay, and they were the Renton Seahawks or something, and they were playing the Santa Clara Niners, and they played 8 games, home and away against, it won't be 8 games, 6 games, home and away against the other NFC West teams. Whoever wins the division, maybe you could chuck another couple of games in there against other teams. Whoever wins the division goes into a playoff format. You have a playoff format, and Jalen Milroe, drafted in round 3, could play in that. He could play in that this summer. So instead of being the third quarterback, because once you get to training camp, the number of reps for Milroe are going to be limited at quarterback, and that's going to go on into the season. But if you give him a summer playing in your offensive system, playing actual football games, that would be entertaining. And it wouldn't just have to be him. If you drafted a quarterback in the first round, you just didn't intend for them to necessarily play as a rookie, you could play them in that kind of a farm team system over the summer. And I think that would be interesting. I just think that would be something that could fill this void better than having the reporters go down to minicamp and picking over who does what, when minicamp really is, you're not getting anything out of the defense from that. The receivers are not even competing against defensive backs, as far as I'm aware. They're thrown against thin air. It's very hard to desk for anything. And I'd love to see that. Imagine if there was a game tomorrow and a Jalen Milroe-led young Seahawks team was playing the Niners with Curtis Rourke at quarterback, for example, who they drafted. That'd be great. I think that would definitely be. Maybe that's because I'm a nerd who loves the NFL, but that would definitely be something that could kill 3 hours for me in the evening. And I think there'd be a lot of people would watch that, Adam.
We're also used to reserve teams. And I'm thinking, do you think the comments for this show are going to have the most two Brits trying to ruin our game? You don't know football. Go back to soccer. You're not welcome here. I think this one could set the record for that, because we really are just trying to absolutely just knacker their game, and we're here for it. I love it. It's great.
No, I actually think, on the contrary,
progress is always good, Rob.
I think the majority of people listening I had no idea we were going to talk about this today. This is not on the list of things I'd written down. But I think a summer league where your young players can go and play, the ones who are not necessarily going to start for you next year, or the ones who are competing to try and make a point that they could, I think that would be a fun little addition to the NFL. And also, it would give players a bit more time to develop, to be coached, to have an opportunity to get a career. Because one of the things we all talk about who follow the NFL and write and comment about the NFL is how difficult it is for young quarterbacks. And if they can go to something like this and make mistakes and learn their professional lives in this kind of like format before coming back to the pro teams, I think that would be good. So I'm here for a farm system that creates a summer league, and for me, that would be better than a bajillion international games to try and extend out the league. I do wonder where this is going to go with international games, Adam. They've got a game in Australia next year. If the Seahawks are playing in Melbourne against the Rams, I will definitely be going to that. But I still wonder, London's a long way away from America. Australia's even further away. And you do wonder a little bit, how do you go and play an NFL game and then get back to America having gone to Australia? That's not a quick trip. Like when the England cricket team go and play the Australian cricket team, they tend to go down like 3 weeks, 4 weeks before they actually play the first meaningful match because they need time to acclimatize. I think a farm system league would be a better use of time and resource than just sort of trying to take these games to Brazil and Australia, and yes, having endless games in Europe as well. That's just my opinion. I don't know what you think, Adam.
I agree. I mean, look, we're seeing the Club World Cup being played in America right now, which is nothing more than a money grab. And at some point, these NFL games are just becoming a complete money grab. I mean, there's a game in Madrid that I might go to see the Commanders, but it's just tourism as opposed to sport. And people need to be very, very cautious about diluting the passion of sport to turn it into entertainment. Like we don't want these games to become like concerts. Like they're our blood and our lives. And the last thing we want is for them to become just, arbitrary entertainment events.
Do you think the NFL fans will speak up that? Because for people who aren't aware in the States, they pitched the idea of having an extra Premier League game. They called it the 39th game. And they were going to play that in America. And the fans over here said, over my dead body, frankly. And it's never happened.
I protested.
Yeah. I mean, they said it's never going to happen. It hasn't happened. But the original idea, long before the NFL thought about international games, was for the Premier League to do that. And it's not happened. But the NFL's done it. It's then expanded it. It's expanding it again to the point that every team may play a game abroad in the future, Adam. And it just seems to just go along unchallenged almost. You may see a whinge on Twitter about it, but it's unchallenged. And I wonder if fans in the States will eventually make themselves heard, because we're both international fans, but I think there is a danger of it becoming too much of a, like you say, a tourism thing, and you end up diluting the game I personally love nothing more than a home crowd revved up, getting behind their team, and a road team trying to deal with that circumstance. The minute that you go to, like you say, Madrid, London, Brazil, Australia, wherever they're going to go, Mexico, it becomes, yeah, like you perfectly put it. It's an opportunity for people to take their phones and take a million pictures and have a few beers.
Yeah, I mean, if I go to Madrid, it's going to be me, my mate, and our 2 wives, and we're going to, just go for that exact reason. And that's not really what sport's supposed to be for. I mean, I wouldn't even support a London team if there were a full-time franchise here. But I support the Seahawks, and that's not going to change. I probably want the London team to lose, to be honest. Like, I would take that side of it as opposed to wanting them to win. Again, that's another thing that just seems completely misguided and misjudged. Like, the NFL have done a really good job in making international fans pick a team to support. And I think trying to implant other teams into those cities where there's existing fan bases would be a terrible idea.
I completely agree. I've never liked that idea. And I don't know what the NFL is thinking. Like, everybody, you only have to go to one of the London games and just see the variety of jerseys that are there. Like, everybody's got their own team. Everyone's adopted a team by now. The idea that you live in London and you say you wouldn't root for them, there's no way that I'm traveling 2.5, 3 hours, 8 or 7 or 9 times, whatever it is, to go and watch a team in London play when I'm a Seahawks fan. That's just, I'd only go and watch them if they were playing Seattle. So I wish they would get rid of that idea. Anyway, it's supposed to be a bit about minicamp, so I'm going to get it back on track here. Here's what I wanted to bring up about Sam Darnold. So there's been 2 things that people who report on the team have said recently. Now, one of them I wrote about, Brady Henderson, who is the best in the business when it comes to reporting on Seattle. Like, when Brady writes something or speaks, I'm listening to it. And he did a really good segment on Seattle sports where he spoke and he revealed, this is when he says something, he's not just plucked it out of thin air. He's got the sources. You have to listen to what he said. And he made it clear that one of the reasons why the Seahawks had moved away from Geno Smith and gone towards Sam Darnold was a leadership thing. Now, I'd heard some similar things that he and DK Metcalf didn't get on, and that part of the reason why they didn't get on is because they clashed, because Geno Smith is very good at going out in a press conference after the game and being accountable, not so much in the locker room. There was a lot of finger pointing there. There was a lot of calling out of teammates and didn't handle the difficult moments particularly well. Brady Henderson's he has mentioned that now and has laid it all out for everybody to see. That's one of the reasons why they've moved on. So I'll ask you about that in a second, Adam. There's something else, though, that came out. Now, I've not listened to this. Curtis Allen, the great Curtis Allen, has listened to... Greg Bell went on one of the podcasts this week. Thankfully, Curtis listened to it, so I didn't have to. But Greg Bell apparently said of Sam Darnold that he didn't look as bad as Sam Howell last year at minicamp, but implying he wasn't very good. And that he also said it's a good thing they're going to run the ball a lot this year. So, 1, what do you make of the leadership thing, Adam? And 2, do you have any concern if that is one person's review of what he's seen from Sam Darnold, that he's even mentioned that he maybe looks as bad as Sam Howell? I'll give you my thoughts on that in a second.
I tend to not give Greg Bell's commentary much thought. Personally, that may be an unpopular view, but he's made some really bold claims over the past few years that have been very swiftly debunked by actions, trades, for example, that have happened that we've been guaranteed will definitely not happen. And with all due respect to Greg, he strikes me as the kind of person reporting what he's being told to report by certain sectors. He has full right to reply. I'm very happy to listen to it. But if you put Greg Bell in a room versus Brady Henderson and he tried to compare the coverage, for example, I would suggest there's quite a stark difference between the two. I'm trying to be as respectful as possible to, because we're on a show here as opposed to talking on WhatsApp. But that will be my view on Greg Bell. Not that he doesn't have his insights and his contacts, but personally, he's not for me. The leadership thing, it did strike me that McDonald was very relaxed speaking about Darnold as a guy almost when he had his press conference, that felt like when he settled into kind of just shooting the breeze more than any other time during the press conference. I don't know if he maybe didn't see Gino as the leader that some do. And, you know, we're not in the locker room. We don't know these people. It's very hard to speak other than what we see from press conferences on the podium, on the sideline. I also got an element from Gino that it was a bit false. He struck me as a bit of a decaf Russell Wilson when he came to the podium, in that he was saying what I think he thought people wanted to hear. And it didn't strike me as completely natural. Whereas I think with Darnold, it does come across as a bit more laissez-faire, and he you know, California kid, maybe that just is his makeup. But that's just my view. But definitely, I'm really pleased you brought that up, because when I watched McDonald speak about Darnold, it felt like he settled in to talking about him in a much more comfortable way than he was with certain other questions.
Yeah. So my thought on this is I'm not surprised at what Brady Henderson said at all, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the Seahawks want a quarterback who can do what they need him to do, and I think, you know, Brady Henderson admitted this, that if you were to probably get them over a beer or six and get them to admit that they'd probably say to you that Geno Smith is a more talented quarterback. But the difference is that they think Sam Darnold is going to be a better leader. So how does that translate to the field? Well, I think we're going into a system now for the first time in a long time in Seattle where the system is going to be more important than the man throwing the football. I think under Russell Wilson, especially with the offensive coordinators that he worked with, there was often just a need and a desperation for him to make something happen. And with Ryan Grubb and Shane Waldron, we now know, looking back on hindsight, that they were not very good offensive coordinators. And I think there was a lot of pressure on Geno Smith to be physically a difference maker at times and to make things happen. And I think that's going to be less of the case now. They are going towards something that is going to look very similar to the Kyle Shanahan system. And I'm pretty sure that if you looked at Jimmy Garoppolo or Brock Purdy or players, or even Kirk Cousins, who had success with Shanahan in Washington, if you looked at any of those players in a minicamp, they probably didn't blow you away with their physical talent. But can they execute the system? And I think that when they look at Sam Darnold, they'll look at somebody who can execute the system. So he might not look as good stepping back, throwing it downfield. There may be some settling in moments during minicamp. I've no doubt during the season that Sam Darnold may well have the odd bad game, or a game where it's going to be up to the defense to win the day, or the running game, or the opponent just being awful to win the day. But I think they are looking for something that is built around a system now where everybody contributes. And I'm happy to give that a go after many years of sort of just looking at the quarterback and saying, well, go on, do something then, which is kind of what it's felt like they've needed to do. As for the take from Greg Bell, I don't know how you can, you know, judge quarterbacks in minicamp. I just really don't. And I think you've got to be really careful saying stuff like, not as bad as Sam Howell last year, but and it's a good thing they're going to run the ball a lot this year. This is minicamp. You know, if we're still saying these things in the final week of training camp, then I think it'd be worth paying more attention to. But to me, that just seems unnecessary. And this is a quarterback who is in Seattle for the first time and is probably going to have to adjust to things and is throwing to people he's only just really met and doesn't have chemistry with yet. So I think he needs to pump the brakes on that a little bit too much. There's a bit too much reading into things at minicamp. And I thought that was interesting when Mike Macdonald was asked by Mike Salk about whether there's a quarterback competition going on or whether there's any chance Sam Darnold loses his job, that Mike Macdonald just flipped. He called it a crazy question. He went above and beyond to sort of nip that in the bud at him, which makes it pretty clear that Sam Darnold's going to get every opportunity. Even though I read an article this week saying that Jalen Milroe has been going into the training facility at 4:30 in the morning to sort of try and do his best, maybe to create a good impression. There's not going to be any quarterback competition here. Like, this is going to be Sam Darnold's job, and it's going to be up to him to keep that job. Can I ask you about that, by the way? How do you feel about that? Like, I always kind of think this is very NFL. This, like, there's not many other sports where someone would, like, eventually we're going to have somebody who just never goes home. Like, they're just going to come out and someone's going to do an interview. Goes, yeah, Jalen Milroe. Do you know what? He stayed all night on just throwing footballs, and then when we got up, and came to work the next day, he was still there, and he just hadn't slept. He's just done a whole day. Like, does anybody ever really need to be at work at 4:30 when everybody else is starting at, let's say, 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever?
It's amazing that the first person that I recall really hearing this about was Russell Wilson, who shortly came out with a phrase, "no time to sleep." And I'm thinking, like, you need to get some sleep, mate. Like, it's one of, if not the most important thing to do for yourself is to go to sleep. The kind of, I don't know how to say it without PC, without sort of demonetizing the show. The impendage wavingness about how late someone is in and how early someone's in is just an amazing thing. And it's certainly something you would not see in soccer, I think, where they are delighted to know they can be in as late as possible and out as early as possible. I forgot that. I actually
just on that. I mean, over here, typically, if you say we're starting at 10, like, everybody turns up at 10, sometimes a little bit later. And what you would do in English football is a player might stay after training to do a little bit extra, but they'd never come in at 4:30, Adam. I mean, that's just...
You'd get battered by the rest of your teammates if you did. Absolutely battered. I forgot that, going back to the previous bit, I actually texted someone who was at training camp, a journalist, and he has never had any issues in flaming quarterback play that's bad. I mean, and actually Sam Howell is a guy that he was particularly critical of. And after the Salk McDonald press conference, I texted him saying, this Darnold thing seems a little bit odd already. I'm not sure what's going on. And he said, Darnold wasn't that bad at all, but credit to Salk for stirring the pot. So from that exchange, that would suggest to me that he was levels and levels above what they were seeing from Sam Howell last year, because I've got the receipts of those from people that were there, and they are not good at all.
Well, that's good to hear. That is really reassuring, Adam, that you've dropped that nugget on us there. So that I'm not a
reporter. I'm not a reporter, by the way, just to be clear. I'm just saying what the odd contact that I have that I spoke to, who's pretty watertight.
Yeah, I think that is reassuring. I'm going to be reassured by that. I thought that question is, like, Mike Florio did a piece on it saying it was a good question, and I was like, yeah, but it's a good question because it's giving you something to write about. It's not a good question. Nobody's doubting that Sam Darnold is going to be the starting quarterback next year. This is not like 2012, where there was already this feeling that, hey, Russell Wilson might take this job, or he's in the competition. I think Pete Carroll even said something along the lines of he's in the competition at some stage, like this year, 13 years ago. None of that has been said about Jalen Milroe. Nobody expects Jalen Milroe to start in week 1 or in week 6. There's no evidence towards that. It's a question that is for me a little bit cheap. And then when I'm sort of going across and I'm seeing like Rich Eisen doing a bit on it, and everybody's talking about the question and the response from Mike McDonald, it just felt like 2025 media nonsense to me. Like, I just, like, it's okay to have to not have these kind of things going on. And I also find it's a little bit, I'm not calling out Mike Salk here because he's not the only one. But why do we have these have to ask the question moments, at minicamp? But when the team is struggling as they were in the latter years of the Pete Carroll era, there's never that sort of same have to ask the question about, for example, the appalling defense that we saw for like weeks and weeks on end. Like, that never comes up. But now we're in the we have to ask that question moment. I'm not a big fan of that. So I thought that was a load of overrated nonsense. What might not be overrated, though, Adam, is the fact that Ken Walker is still on the sidelines and not healthy and not really doing much. And he's obviously an exceptionally talented player. I can remember in week 1 against Denver last year thinking, wow, if they actually run the ball, I mean, that was a mistake to think that they would do that under Ryan Grubb, that he could end up being one of the leading running backs in the NFL this season. Of course, he got injured then and was in and out of the team, and it never really worked. The running game was a disaster. Do you think we're ever going to see Ken Walker have an NFL career, or is he always going to just be that player who flatters to deceive, that sort of classic player who's always just a bit too banged up to max things out? And if he is going to be that kind of a player, are they not just better off just going all in on Zach Charbonnet and letting him take the job? Because when he started, Zach Charbonnet looks so much better as a starter than he did as a change of pace guy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Charbonnet strikes me as the kind of guy that needs less sort of week-to-week rhythm than Walker. Like, if Walker got hurt in week 3, Charbonnet strikes me as the kind of guy that could come in week 4 and look like he's been playing for the last 2 to 3 weeks, whereas Walker doesn't strike me as that kind of player. That might be, me just picking. The game's been too long ago, but in my mind, that's how I see them. That Walker is the kind of guy that needs rep and rep and rep, and then go from there. But I mean, what I was going to ask you is, what would you need to see from Walker this year to give you any confidence and or discussion about extending his contract, whether that be the franchise tag or a 2-year deal or something?
That's a really good question, because it's hard to know, because running back contracts are quite unpredictable, because we're living in an era where, like, Saquon Barkley just got an extension on a contract that didn't need to be extended because he had a great season for the Eagles. And every now and again, you do see running backs get a big chunky contract extension. I think if he has, let's just say he has an unbelievable season and is one of the central figures of Seattle's offense, I would still allow him to reach free agency. I'd still let him test the market. I think you've got to let the market come to you in that regard. You've got to let him go and see what people are willing to pay him, and then you make your move. And maybe you can beat a team to get a little bit more money in there to bring him back. I think that's how you have to look at it. And even then, I think you need to be looking at, if you remember when DK Metcalf signed his first contract extension, it was 3 years with sort of the flexibility to move on. I think you have to be going down that road. I think he's been too banged up in 3 seasons that in his 4th season, even if he has a great year, I don't think teams are going to be running to pay him an absolute fortune. And if they do, you've just got to shrug your shoulders and say the very best of luck wherever you're going to go. I think running back as a position, I'm quite happy. I've always kind of had this feeling about it, that running back as a position, I don't mind taking running backs early, preferably not in the 1st round, but like 2nd, 3rd round, I've not got a problem with that. But I don't necessarily want to pay them afterwards unless they are Marshawn Lynch. Now, if you have a player like Marshawn, who is just a culture setter, that is the heart and soul of your team, I think you have to pay that player and keep them. But those players are so rare. Like at the minute, how many of those are running backs in the league? Possibly Saquon Barkley. And we're only saying that because he had a great season in Philadelphia. He wouldn't have said that 12 months ago necessarily. So I don't think you pay him, and even if he has an amazing year, I think you wait to free agency and see what his market is. And if you need to move on and go with Charbonnet and Damien Martinez or McIntosh or anybody else, if you want to draft another running back, then that's fine by me, Adam. I think you have to be willing to draft these guys and let them walk and then replace them. I think that's what you've got to do.
Which presumably was part of the thinking in drafting Charbonnet in the first place, right? So although we don't know how much Pete Carroll had a say in that, John Schneider would have certainly had a decent say in doing that. And I think you're right. I guess in my head, it's one of those things that if you put a poll up, should you extend Kenneth Walker, and the responses are kind of 65-35 yes, that's probably enough to say no. Whereas you would know by the results if it was 99, like with Lynch, for example, not one person would have said no at the time. And that this is not a scientific way to build a roster, but there's kind of, with this position, it feels like one of those where at the time. And if there's a discussion, that probably means there shouldn't be a discussion.
The other thing that's going to be interesting from Seattle's point of view moving forward, assuming that Clint Kubiak is in Seattle for a long time, is the Kubiak offense and the Shanahan offense in the past has been able to get production out of running backs. Now, Shanahan in San Francisco is a weird one because they will regularly spend a third-round pick on a running back, and a year later they've cut them or they've traded them or it just hasn't worked out. And they've actually drafted a couple of guys in the last few years that I really liked in the mid-round range, and their career never took off. Like, they looked really good in college. They've gone to the Shanahan system. You think, wow, that's a great fit for him. He's going to have a great time there. And then it hasn't worked out. But then they'll go and draft. They'll sign someone undrafted, and they'll look quite good. But even then, they'll sign someone will come in and play well for 3 or 4 weeks, and then they disappear again. They obviously felt they need to go and get Christian McCaffrey, so they wanted a big talented player there. But when you look at the Kubiak, when his dad, when Gary Kubiak was running teams, again, they managed to find production from a variety of different players. The Mike Shanahan offense has always found production from players who didn't necessarily need to be drafted early. So I'm wondering whether this is just going to be a running back friendly system moving forward, and whether even if Walker has an amazing season, even if he's there to re-sign at a somewhat reasonable rate next offseason, whether you still think about, no, we're just not going to pay for running back now because this is the system that enables you to find production there. I guess it depends how much cap space you've got as well, what else you've done. And maybe that brings us on to something else, because there's a huge assumption here, Adam, that Charles Cross is going to get paid a contract extension in the coming weeks or months, that maybe at training camp that will happen. I think fair play to him that he is not hinting at a holdout or anything like that, because I don't think he deserves to put himself in that position, because I don't think he's played well enough. But how do you feel about this? My personal view would be to let him play this season and make a decision next offseason. And if he has a great year, I've no problem giving him a big contract to be the left tackle for years to come. But I think if he plays another year where he's only okay in his 4th year, then I'm making him play on that 5th-year contract, and I'm not committing to this guy. I know it. You can't get into this problem of just wanting so badly to have an answer at left tackle that you end up paying a fortune for somebody just for the sake of having a name. Oh, we drafted him in the top 10. Everybody knows who Charles Cross is. Therefore, let's just sign him and say that position's done. He's not played well enough to warrant a massive extension. I think you've got to go and make him earn that extension. So I want to see how well he plays this year before he gets the new contract. But everybody in the media just seems to think it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to get paid before the season starts. But I'm not sure about that, Adam. And I wouldn't be sure about that if they did it. I don't think that'd be necessarily the best move.
I hadn't even considered the thought of paying him before seeing another year, to be honest. And maybe that's because I've not been reading enough people that are talking about it. But for me, you have the right of the 5th-year option because you want to see them play the 4th year. And, we've got the super chat that will come to, how do you make the offensive line better? Maybe we can deal with that now. But, I don't think Charles Cross is a position that is unimprovable on, but by a long shot. I mean, he's been fine and he's been a name, but I think, if he wasn't drafted 9th overall, let's say he was drafted in the 3rd round, like Abe Lucas was, would there be as much clamor for him to be, absolutely paid? I think you'd start seeing a lot more scrutiny on his performances if his draft stock was we'd use slightly less. It's almost like, well, we used this on this guy, so we should give him as much of the benefit of the doubt as possible because it's coming, which happens a lot. It happens with loads of positions. This isn't exclusive to Cross. We'll all do that for loads of players going forward. But I hadn't even considered the prospect of giving Charles Cross a huge deal. Now, it doesn't strike me as sensible at all.
Yeah, and I know I've seen one of the comments saying it's better to overpay a tackle than it is to try and find a new one for cheap. But why does that have to be? It's not two options. It's not overpay Charles Cross or try and replace him on the cheap. It could be don't overpay Charles Cross, maybe even trade him and draft somebody else in the 1st round. It doesn't necessarily have to be that his replacement is cheap. It could even be a veteran that you sign. I think you've got to be careful, though. Like, when you start signing average players to elite contracts, that's when you get yourselves into trouble. And when you are looking at the cap space right now and it looks good, it looks good now, but in the future, it can look a bit crap if you've overpaid someone, especially a left tackle who get mega money. You know, the guy who said replacing on the cheap is a first round pick is not a cheap. It's not replacing someone on the cheap. That is your biggest asset that you have to spend every single offseason. That is not replacing him on the cheap. That's just replacing a player who is a first round pick with another first round pick. It's a like for like. And if that next player comes in and is better, then great. You know, I'd put it down to the same way. If you draft a quarterback in the first round and they are average to below average in performance, the worst thing you can do is give them a Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence $50 million a year contract. Now, Charles Cross isn't going to get a contract that size, but he could get a contract that makes him the best paid left tackle in the league or in the top three. And I think people are just, this is what I don't get. You know, the commenter in the comment section is still talking about it. It's talking about the risk factor of moving on and all of this, Adam. I think it's far more risky if he has another average year this year to pay Charles Cross an elite salary than it is to try and find someone who's better than he is. Because right now, I tell you, it's not going to be that hard to find someone who's better than he is. He's been okay. He has been okay. I never want to pay okay players top money. Now, if he's willing to take an okay contract, fine. But I don't want to make him one of the top 3 highest paid left tackles in the league. I'm going to have a look now and see how much that is per year, which is why I think he has to have another season on his current contract to see if he can become more than he's shown so far. The only problem is, though, Adam, is I feel like I've had this conversation for the last 2 years talking about, you know, him taking the next step. So, I mean, average per year, Trent Williams is on $28 million a year. Christian Darrisaw is on 26 and Laramie Tunsil's on 25. Now, these are not unbelievable players, by the way. I think Charles Cross would want to, I think he'd want to top all of those. So are you willing to pay Charles Cross $28 million a year? I think that would be that would make me pause for thought based on what he's shown so far.
Even not to top it, I mean, what's the franchise tag number? Because you could certainly use that as a baseline for negotiations. And that can't be much less than 21, 22. And no, that would give me real pause for thought if someone said Charles Cross signed a 5-year, you know, $150 million with $110 million guaranteed or something. I can't see that at all.
So the franchise tag for an offensive lineman this year was $23.4 million, and it's projected to be $27.6 in 2026. So obviously he'd be 2027. So it would go up again. It'd be close to $30 million to keep him after his contract's expired. I think it's a big year. I think the main thing for him is to play this year and dangle the carrot of give him a chance to show he can be better than he's shown so far. And if he can show that, no issue at all with paying him a handsome contract. I am not paying him $28 million a year to get his ass kicked off the edge to see him being bullied in the way that he is too often. And I think Big Mike made a good point in the comments a little bit earlier, saying that maybe if they don't pass the ball as much, that will help him. I think that's possible, but run blocking was never really his forte at Mississippi State. It might be. He looks as if he's put on some weight this year, which I think he's needed to since he came into the league. It's just the power nature of him. Like he is a player who's got tremendous feet. Like he gets his feet into the right place so often. He is very, very nimble. He has rare ability to move at his size. But when people get into his frame, they bully him too much. And he does not shut down that edge enough to warrant the big bucks. So I think this is a big season for him. Yeah, and I think they've got to wait.
It strikes me as a similar thing to what I said about Walker, that, you know, if you polled the fan base, like if you're going to give a player, a non-quarterback, $28 million a year, that should be the kind of season that when the clock hits 0-0 in the last game of the season, you should be sprinting down to his locker with a contract. and it should be non-controversial that, you know, this is the guy that we have to get signed up as soon as possible. And every podcast and, you know, every media guy is talking about the need to get Charles Cross signed up. I don't feel that attitude in the fan base at all. When I think I barely heard him even mentioned this offseason, really, in the general scheme of things, versus, you know, some players that you get spoken about, you know, what we're going to do with DK, what we're going to do with Gino. Like, that felt like it was much more of a conversation than Charles Cross. I'd be laughing about the room if he was asking me for a contract for that, you know, 5 years or whatever. Now you need to show me. I don't think he's shown us at all.
There was definitely some. So one of the things that I thought was quite interesting was just trying to find the pass blocking. Okay, here we go. There was a bit of talk very early last season, and it was just, who are you going to pay? Like when the Seahawks started 3-0, I remember Brock Hughes was talking to Mike Salk about this. Who's the core players? Who are you going to pay? And they spent no time on Charles Cross. Like, yeah, you're going to pay Charles Cross. He's the first person you're going to pay. And I was like, have I missed something here? Like, this is, look, I'm not saying that he's got a lot. He needs to show a lot to warrant that sort of level of faith. Like, I'm looking at the number of pressures that were given up last season. Charles Cross, 5th in the league. Number of pressures given up at tackle. So the players above him were Cam Robinson, who struggled, Trevor Penning, who seems to be on his way out of New Orleans, DJ Glaze, DeMontre Jacobs. They're the only players who had more pressures than he did. He had the same number as J.C. Latham, a rookie. 47 pressures given up. That's a high number. And he had the 4th most hurries. So again, Cam Robinson, Trevor Penning, DJ Glaze, they're the top 3 for hurries conceded. Then you got Charles Cross on 36. And he gave up 6 sacks. So that's a lot. That is a lot. Now, Ryan Grubb's system did not help. They have to say that. And I do think this offense will help. But those are not the numbers that translate to $20-odd million a year at this point. He has to be better than that. Has to be better than that going forward. And
just for the people saying it, is there any idea on the percentage versus drop back numbers that you've got there by any chance? Because that's come up a few times. It's not an unfair thing to say.
I'm trying to find it now.
Just to fill the time whilst you're talking, someone said, you know, why are you assuming he's going to get loads of money if we don't think he's that good? Because that's just the way the NFL works. I mean, the next one on the cab rank is always the one that seems to get paid the most. If he would accept a, 5-year, $75 million contract, I'm sure we'd all say, yeah, do that right now. That's great. But I think the assumption is that the way players are in the NFL with their agents, there's an urge to be, the highest paid. So we're assuming that what Cross is going to get or ask for, certainly if he's getting his contract after his 3rd year, is top dollar, right?
Yeah. Like, it's just the way it is. Like, he will, we've already mentioned, like, look at the players who've got paid. Christian Darrisaw is the 2nd highest paid. I can't remember if it was 3rd, but it wasn't a spectacular player. Like, players at that position get paid a lot. I've had a look at efficiency, the efficiency numbers for Charles Cross. He is ranked 36th amongst tackles for efficiency. So efficiency in this, I will read what it says, is described as pass blocking efficiency, a stat measuring pressure allowed on a per snap basis with weighted towards sacks allowed. So I'm guessing that's what people are looking for, and he finished 36th. He had the 36th best. So it's not great. When you think that there are 64 starting tackles in the league, and he's 36th for efficiency. So again, I think it points to the fact that he was not helped by the system, but the numbers are still pretty bad. And that's, it's still a very, very high number of pressures conceded. And, I can try and find Abe Lucas and sort of see what his sort of stats were as well. I'm not going to dig through that now. I think the point's been made. Like, he needs to play better this year. I think he needs to play a lot better this year. And if he can do that, no problem with paying him. But we're 3 years into his career now, and we're saying the same things we've been saying all along. I thought it was a second-round pick, a second-round grade. I always thought he was going to go in the first round because of, you don't always have 32 first-round players. And because of his position, I thought he was going to go in the first round. But his career has played out. This is not me blowing my own trumpet. This is exactly what I thought his career would look like. I think he's an okay left tackle. But I think we need to see more before we pay him as an elite player. The next thing I wanted to talk about, Adam, and this will probably be the last thing, because we've nearly done an hour. In fact, no, we had that super chat, didn't we? So we'll come on to that before I just bring this up. Dogzilla says, I'm desperate to know how this O-line can be any better. So thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate that. It's the only one we've got so far. So if there's any more, send them in. Obviously, Charles Cross playing a bit better is one of them. The left guard that they've drafted in the first round having a decent year and hitting the ground running is the other there, Adam. And then you've got the 3 question marks. You know, can Christian Haynes play better with new coaches at right guard? Is he even going to get that job? Is it going to be Anthony Bradford? Is it going to be Lemire? You know, who's going to win the job at centre? That it's still uncomfortable that the centre and the right guard positions are just wide open. And there isn't anybody that you think, well, he'll win that job, or he'll get that, or you'd expect him to get that. Like, it really just feels as if they're hoping for the best of those 2 positions, that somebody will step forward and win them. And then at right tackle, we've got to hope that Abe Lucas is going to be healthy. But they've signed another right tackle who, you know, my opinion of him coming into the league was quite good. I like the player they've signed to back up at right tackle. So I like the fact that they seem to be covered there this year. So it's the centre and the right guard position that worries me the most. Have they done enough, do you think? I think with the coaching, I'm going to say yes, this will be a much improved line. I don't think it'll necessarily be an elite line. And I still think they've got more work to do in free agency in the draft next year. But I think they'll be heading in the right direction this year because of the coaches more than anything.
You have to hang your hat on that, right? I mean, not to sort of take the opposite view because, you know, it's boring if people agree. But, I was one of the fans that was probably with sort of the very, very much of a fan hat on in free agency, saying we needed to sign someone just to get someone through the door, just to, you know, fill a hole with a known quantity. That's what I wanted. Now, I hear and I understand and appreciate every single argument that I've heard that said, well, that guy wasn't worth the money, that guy you couldn't get, that guy may have been injured, and that guy, you know, wanted to go somewhere else. I get it. I was of the view that you just had to go and get someone. That's going to be proven right or wrong. It could be both, to be honest. And we're not going to know that until the games start. The coaching has to be better. Otherwise, the whole thing's going to fall apart. But yeah, I think at this point, what else have you got to hang a hat on other than if, you know, the coaching is going to be better and they've got one more, hopefully, cornerstone piece in that they drafted. They've obviously felt that they didn't need to do any more than they did. Maybe they're going to pick up some guys that get cut, you know, on the cut downs. I think they're short on players, but it's boring broadcasting because I'm really fence sitting here, but I just have to see how it plays out in the games before I can really add anything onto my view that they should have signed someone else.
There's some big names who are set to be free agents next year. And I have to believe that a lot of these big names are going to get new contracts because the league is not minded to let top offensive linemen reach the open market. But, you know, I'm interested to see what happens with that because there might be 1 or 2 teams that you know, feel the cap pinch and feel as if they don't want to pay a guard or a center, for example. And maybe they've paid a quarterback a lot of money and they need to find a savings somewhere. So there may be opportunities next offseason to sort of sign or trade for that big addition that's going to take things to the next level. I just wonder if someone like Bryce Campbell with this coaching staff could end up being like Dominic Pooney was last year for the Niners. You know, somebody who comes in and as a rookie has a really good year and has people thinking, no, I like the look of him. You know, he's somebody who could do something. Or maybe it is Christian Haynes. And there are 1 or 2 centers that are going to come out into the draft next year that I like a lot. And, I'm definitely not gone through all of the centers yet that are going to be draft eligible. So there may be others. And, it's going to be a position that we watch an awful lot next season in college. But I still think with that coaching and with Zabel coming in, I think there is a chance. There is a chance that they could be better. But look, if they were league average, that'd be a massive improvement from what we've seen recently. So the other thing I wanted to mention, Adam, is I went through this, and this is a big thing for me. It's being better at home than they have been, and the record at home has been horrendous for a number of years. So 2021, they were 3-5 at home. 2022, 5-4. 2023, 5-3. And then last season, 3-6. If you go and look at the last 6 seasons, they're 27-23 at home, but that includes a 7-1 home record when there were no fans in the stadium in 2020. And that eliminated any kind of home field advantage apart from travel and familiarity of surroundings. There were no fans in the arena. If you take that season out of it, the Seahawks are 20-19 at home in 5 seasons with fans in the stadium. That is, if you'd have said that 10 years ago, that over the course of half a decade, Seattle would basically be 500 at home, that would have been unthinkable. They've got to find a way, haven't they? Whether that's with their style of play, whether it's just winning more games or anything like that. They've got to find a way to be better at home. I've seen people mentioning that ticketing and stuff like that. That is important to me. Like, I'm going to be fascinated to see what that stadium looks like when I'm there week 1 for that Niners game. Because the last time I was in Seattle for a game was against the Niners, and it was a sea of red. Like, all of the expensive seats were bought by Niners fans. There was Niners fans everywhere. Is it going to be different this time? I do feel like the team needs to have some kind of a policy to prevent that kind of thing happening again.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the Denver game, the opener last year, which was a throwback game. Everything was set up for it to be a massive home game, and there was so much orange. Like, I know Denver, storied franchise, they travel well, ex-rivals, but there was so much more than I expected. I mean, even the Eagles game Monday night the season before with Drew Lock one that I was at, there wasn't anywhere near as much green that day as there was orange that one. There was a flexing issue there, which may have thrown people off. But anyway, yeah, it really struck me how much orange there was. But that kind of leads me on something that I wanted to talk about, and not to sort of pat us on the back, because there's nothing worse than that on a show. But we spent about 5 years tearing our hair out at how annoyed we were at just the impasse of this franchise, mainly because the defense was terrible. And Pete Carroll was supposed to be a defensive mastermind, and it was just rubbish. And I think this year, everything I've read and watched and listened to, I've just got a feeling the defense is going to be properly back. And there's nothing better than watching good defensive football as a home fan. And I'm hoping that that is going to encourage people not to sell their tickets because they want to go to the games. And I don't really blame people for not wanting to go, because yeah, it was soft football for half a decade. Yeah, we won some games, we lost some games, but it wasn't exciting to go. I've been every year for the last, since COVID, once a year, and for the 10 years before that. There's a massive difference in watching this team, in the glory days as such to now, that it's just not as exciting. They've won as many games, but it's just not as fun. And I'm hoping that return to proper defense, which I think we're going to see this year, might bring all that back around.
Well, this is, again, the interesting comparison to sort of English sport. And Americans and North Americans are very bored of us sort of comparing the two. But over here, what you would have is you would have a visiting end of the stadium. So the fans would all be, you would have them, they'd all be focused in one area where all of the road fans are. And yeah, of course, there may be one or two that sneak into the home end, but they would not be able to go in wearing, let's say, a Niners jersey in this instance, because one, they'd either get their heads kicked in, or two, they would be immediately escorted out of the stadium. Like, you can't go and sit in the home end. Like, that's just not how it works over here. But in America, because you don't have a road end, the fans who do want to travel and watch the Niners in Seattle have no choice but to buy home tickets. And then you have this situation where, like over here, you wouldn't give up your season ticket of a big game. You would go there. But in this instance, it's an investment situation where there are people who are getting season tickets at a good price, and then they're selling those tickets at an inflated price. And that kind of thing, Adam, could put your kids through college if you do it every year, or it could pay for an expensive holiday, or it could pay for you to buy a great car. And as you've mentioned there, if the Seahawks are not that fun to watch anymore, and if they aren't winning, where's the motivation to trundle along and go and sit there or stand there in the rain and watch them lose to an NFC West rival again, versus getting an absolute shed load of money to allow someone from San Francisco to, or wherever, or a locally based Niners fan to go and have the pleasure of going instead. And that it's a difficult proposition for American sport. How does it's not just the Seahawks problem, it's a problem in a lot of stadiums. How do you make sure that you have as many home fans in these stadiums as possible? Because I don't think it does the sport any good at all when you have stadiums that are just absolutely loaded with road fans. You want to have a proper home field advantage for me.
Yeah, I mean, my season ticket at Tottenham, if I can't go, I sell it back to the club and another Tottenham member buys my ticket. And that's the only way you can do it, because the way the tickets are scanned on phones, there's no other way. You can't do a ticket for above face value. So, I think Brian from Hawk Blogger is trying to do something like that, but the team should be doing it really. But it's probably seen as anti-American to not have that capitalist nature about it. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously one thing, that the tickets thing. But I always think the onus is on the team to perform better and encourage people to want to go and watch them. And some of the games we've had over the last few years, where the first drive of the game has been 6-7 minutes, run down our throats. It's just been miserable. And I'd have been furious if someone offered me 6 times face value for that ticket and I traipsed down there to watch us lose in the way that I knew we'd lose. You'd be pissed off.
Yeah, I agree. I given that, like, I can sort of pay for things on my phone, and I just look at the phone and the phone sort of reads my eyeball and goes, yeah, it's you, and all of that. You'd think there might be a way of, when you're trying to get into the stadium, like, it reads sort of who sort of reads your face or something, or your eyes and something like that. And if you were, if you signed up to like some kind of membership system as a Seahawks fan, and somebody transferred the tickets to you, that your details would be in there, and that would enable you to get in if you bought the ticket of somebody. I don't know. But you're quite right. It's not just the tickets thing. It is the performance of the team. And if the team is playing very, very well, more people in Seattle are more inclined to take those tickets and to buy those tickets. But even then, I wasn't there, but I'm guessing there was a lot of Niners fans for the NFC Championship game in the 2013 season. Like, there's probably always going to be a lot of road fans. It's a fun place to go. There'll be a lot of fans who've not been to Seattle who will treat that as a great weekend away and taking a game while they're there. And Lumen Field has a reputation for being a pretty cool place to go, so they'll be up for it. So I don't know. It's something they've got to improve, though. They can't be 3, 4, 5 wins at home for much longer. They've got to be going back to winning 6, 7, 8, 9 games if they're playing 9 home games in a season. That has to be the way they go back to that. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching this. We've done over an hour.
I've actually got something, Rob, to talk about.
Chuck it in.
I was listening to Hugh Millen on Friday, who was talking about the Seahawks wide receivers.
Okay.
And I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right, but let's say there were 130 receivers in the league that took 20 or more targets in the season, right? JSN and Cooper Kupp ranked in the hundreds, so I think 105th and 115th. I'm not sure which way round, but if I'm out, I'm out by 2 or 3 on being inside and basically lined up as slot guys. So nothing really outside for either of them. And look, what I know about X's and O's, you can write on a postage stamp and have space all around the boundaries. I know nothing about this stuff. But if those two are going to be our main guys, and let's say Arroyo's hopefully plugged to be our third pass catcher, it struck me that, are you slightly worried, or I'm slightly concerned that there's a risk of being moderately predictable and not being able to open the game up as we'd like to with the outside guy and the deep threat, that could stymie the offense somewhat.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm not that worried about it because Seattle, when they played their best football, had Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse and not a lot else, when they won the Super Bowl. And Kearse could make plays downfield, but he wasn't DK Metcalf. And Doug Baldwin was exceptional, sort of doing a lot of different things, and he could get downfield and he could separate. But again, he wasn't someone that you'd say, wow, what a deep threat necessarily. That wasn't like a main characteristic of him. So Kupp and JSN are both different players to Kearse and Baldwin, and I think they are going to be sort of best moved around, lined up inside. I do think you can use JSN as a bit like you did with Tyler Lockett and Doug Baldwin to make plays downfield. I think we saw that particularly at Ohio State, and I can remember the great grab he made against San Francisco, for example, in the game that I went to the season before last, where it was downfield. He did create a bit of separation. He produced an amazing catch that you would imagine like a Baldwin or a Lockett making when they got into that position. So I still think you can do some of that. You ideally have somebody who can be that really dynamic, get downfield, whether it's running the seam, whether it's just sort of running the red line or anything like that, and beat them over the top. But what I would say again is, and this is a point I've made a few times since all of the major changes to the roster, is look at the Shanahan receivers. We're gonna run this offense now. The Brandon Ayuks, it's all about slants. It's all about how they run those slants. It's about doing what they need to do in order to get open. That sort of those minute details to work around. Deebo Samuel did a lot of his work at the line of scrimmage. Slants. I'm trying to think of other players that they've had. That a lot of their receivers operate in the way that they're going to use Kupp and JSN, is the point I'm making. And their biggest sort of difference maker as a receiver has been George Kittle, the tight end. Now, as it happens, Elijah Arroyo is going to be, if he stays healthy, and hopefully he will be an incredibly dynamic tight end pass catching threat who has shown him in his best season at Miami last year that he can do all of those things that George Kittle can do. And before he was drafted by Seattle, Kittle was the player I was comparing him to the most, because he can do a lot of the stuff that Kittle does, not as a blocker, but as a receiver. So what I think you'll find is that this will be a very different offense, and there will be a lot more slants, and it will be a lot more methodical rather than explosive at times. But I think if Arroyo is as good as I suspect he can be, he can be sort of a big time game changer for Seattle in the way that Kittle was, and that your other guys with Marcus Valdes-Scantling and hopefully Horton and players like that being able to provide a bit of a deep threat and to provide a slightly different type of receiver. I still think it's going to be very much like that Shanahan offense, which doesn't need DK Metcalf running down the field. So I'm comfortable with it, but it will be interesting to see what happens when that season begins and to see whether this can function, as we all hope it can.
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me was less about the downfield and more about just widening the field at the snap. And I guess you're right, there'll be loads of motions and whatever, but I don't know, it just slightly worried me that there's a thought that they don't really not going to have an X that can at least draw some coverage out to make space in the middle for the other guys. Like it could have just feel like it's very condensed in there if there's no one that's actually acting as a real life X, not just standing there pretending to do it.
I'm like you. I'm not a big X's and O's guy, so I can't specifically speak to having watched a lot of, let's say, Sean McVay tape. But last year and the year before, it was Kupp and Puka Nacua as the main threat for the Rams. And now they've just got Puka Nacua, and they drafted a tight end in round 2, as we did. So,
and Davante Adams, in fairness,
and they've signed Davante Adams, but Davante Adams is not.
Yeah, weird one.
Is he going to be sort of what? He's 30s now, so I think what we're seeing is that the game's changed a little bit. It's kind of gone towards sort of maybe a bit more of what we're seeing in Seattle and San Francisco and LA. And that it might not be so much of an issue. And I still think Cooper Kupp can line up outside and run around downfield and stretch the field a little bit, or keep it spread open. You could have 2 tight ends in there, or you could have 3 receivers and 1 in the slot and 2 out wide, and it could be JSN and Kupp outside, and you could put Horton inside or anybody of these. You could put Marcus Valdes-Scantling inside if you wanted to, and have him run the seam. So I think there's a lot of options that they have there. But I will admit there was a couple of moments this week because I was reading an article about they put like a player. I can't remember where I read it now. It was an article that had a player on every team that each team should consider trading. And there were a couple of times when it got to receivers, and I thought, well, could they add another weapon there? Would they do that? And then I start thinking of the fact that they have gone after weapons aggressively via trades in the past, and I was kind of wondering, is that something that they could theoretically do when they and the Ravens are always very open-minded about adding weapons as well. So could that be something to do? And then I just thought, because they have invested in JSN, they have invested in Cooper Kupp, they have invested in Elijah Arroyo. So I think they're going to give these guys a chance. But admittedly, again, it's on my position list to watch in college football this year. Receivers. On the off chance that the Hortons and people like that don't end up being really good and that they have to draft for that position again. But receivers, offensive linemen, quarterbacks, cornerbacks, always defensive linemen, they're always going to be positions that I think you have to look at, and that will be no different this college season. So, look, let's wrap it up with this. How on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you with the pass catching options on the team at the minute?
I think it's one short of being a really good group. Now, someone like Horton may come through as a player who really needs to be watched, but it's a lot to ask of a rookie. My concern about the offense are only really that Sam Darnold spirals, and I'm not saying that because I think it's going to happen. But he has shown in the past a propensity that when things go wrong, he struggles to get back on track, whether that's in game or over a course of games. And that's my biggest, that's a far bigger concern for me this season than the actual personnel they've got. I think personnel wise, we're okay. Kupp's a funny one because we talk about Davante Adams. The Rams let go of Kupp to sign an older receiver in Davante Adams. So you kind of a bit worried, like Sean McVay, if he was going to get rid of his guy, what does he know that maybe we don't? That's a concern. Again, I'm not saying that I'm particularly worried about it, but I think it's something that we should watch out for. That if Kupp doesn't have a great season, we could reverse engineer it and say, well, Sean McVay did let the guy go and sign an older guy to replace him, so maybe he knew something. But I'm not overly worried about the personnel. It's more just various traits that players have that I could see us digging into a hole that we struggle to get out of more than anything else.
I must admit, I think this year is kind of really solidified in my own mind how I want to view the receiver position. I want to try every year to try and find a Puka Nacua or a Doug Baldwin, those kind of players that you find later on. It's a position that I'm quite happy to sort of, unless there's a top player staring you in the face in round one that you just think, oh I love this player so much. I'm willing to sort of wait on that position. I want the Seahawks to be trenches based. I want to see him run the ball a lot better, and I want to play off that with play action and stuff. And Sam Darnold had a great year throwing to Justin Jefferson last year. JSN is not Justin Jefferson because nobody really is. But if he can be 75% of that, 60% of that, I still think you're going to have a really good receiver there to throw to. And that will be enough as long as Elijah Arroyo stays healthy, Cooper Kupp stays healthy. That's going to be I suppose some people are saying it already. If Kupp's not healthy and if Arroyo's not healthy, then it could get a little bit desperate and you might start looking around to see what's out there. But, this is also a position, I think, where teams do find players and they have been able to find them. And I think smart. I really liked Torrey Horton when I watched him at Colorado State. So I'm kind of hoping that maybe he might be somebody who emerges into a really good player for Seattle. But I'm with a lot of people. I think it's a 6 or 7 out of 10 group right now. But I don't think you need a 10 out of 10 group to be a top team. I think there's other positions that I want to be great on the trenches, and I want to be great at quarterback. I want to be great on the pass rush before I want to be great at receiver. And we've had that. Like for the last few years, Seattle have had JSN first round, Tyler Lockett proven veteran. DK Metcalf, second round on a big contract. Noah Fant coming in. They haven't been able to get the ball to these players. And I think that's part of the problem, is that when you have players who expect the ball all the time, it becomes sort of like alarm goes off. They're not getting the ball. It's a waste of money. It was a waste of draft pick. Now you can sort of force feed JSN a little bit, get your money's worth for using a top 20 pick or top 25 pick on him, and everybody else fight for scrap for your touches. I like that sort of mentality about it. But it's going to be a very different season. That's one of the ways it's going to be a very, very different season. I'm here for it. And
yeah, we asked for it. We said it. We wanted that. So bring it on. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm really looking forward to it. It's a shame it's a long way off, and there's no like bloody Euros or World Cup or anything to to pass the time this year. But it'll come around soon enough. I can't believe it's my birthday in 8 days, and how's that come around again? Like before long, I'll be pushing 50. I can't believe it. So. So there we go. I'm only 40, by the way. Okay, there we go. I think we've got in some good topics there, Adam. Always appreciate your time. We are obviously not doing a ton of videos right now because we're in the quietest part of the season, but give the video a subscribe. Give the channel a subscribe because when the season is back and up and running and rolling and we get to training camp, there's going to be a lot more of these videos, so you don't want to miss out on any of that and all the draft coverage that we do. Give the video a like, leave a comment if you can. There is the occasional article on SeahawksDraftBlog.com at the moment, so be sure to check out that as well. Until next time, bye for now.